بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي وقني شر نفسي وفلت لساني وأن أضل أو أضل أو أذل أو أذل بغير حق رب العالمين وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, I hope to be able to share with you a few reflections on the significance, the importance, the function, and the value of Ramadan as a form of worship for Muslims that is integral to the development of a Muslim psychology and a Muslim mode of being in the world, conscientious of one's responsibility to one's Creator. And the fact that that responsibility is fulfilled in real life, in real time, in real space, not through a withdrawal from life, but through an actual engagement of life. And to be engaged in life, one of the things that we have to be cognizant of on a very immediate level is that from time immemorial, it has been recognized that two things are of potential danger to the human being, more than the elements, more even than other human beings, more than predatory animals. And these two things are the human passions and the ego. In fact, in the Arabic language, these things are generally summed up in the term an-nafs. The nafs, or the center of the passions and the ego, have been recognized as something that needs to be controlled, that needs to be kept in place. Otherwise, if the passions are left to run free and the ego is left to get out of control, then the human being may end up either destroying himself or destroying others, or both. From the ancient times, it has been recognized that the self is a problem, and there have been a number of ways that have been devised to try to deal with the self. And I want to talk about two of these ways. The first of these is the mode of self-mortification. And by self-mortification, we mean that what we try to do is either transcend the self, that is, transcend the passions and the ego, put ourselves in a position where we are above our passions, we are above our egos, and therefore they have no effect upon us. Or similarly, we can try to simply destroy or obliterate our passions and obliterate our egos. When we see this choice being accessed and being pursued by some of the ancient religious communities, we see it among the ancient Greeks, for example, in the Gnostic tradition, a tradition that basically looked upon all material attachment to be evil and to be, in a way, the most insidious threat to the human being, inasmuch as, to the extent that human beings remain attached to any material, then they will be mired in the passions and in the ego. We saw it also, in fact, in some expressions of early Christianity. Indeed, the Quran itself tells us about a group of Christians who, in their effort to arrive at the ability to live a fully righteous life, devised means of trying to mortify the self. And so the Quran speaks of this particular community of Christians as having innovated a manner of self-mortification. So the Quran refers to a رهبانية ابتدعوها ما كتبناها عليهم that they devised a form of asceticism or hermitage, an attempt to transcend the self, to transcend the passions, to destroy the ego. The Quran says that while God did not impose this mode of religiosity upon them, they chose it for themselves. But the Quran depicts this in such a way that it is clear that this was not an attempt to go against the way of God. It was simply an attempt to find a way of controlling the passions, of overcoming the dictates of the ego. The problem with it was that it was not based in divine revelation, and therefore it was not grounded in teachings that had actually been delivered by God. At any rate, the whole point of trying to mortify the self is, as I said earlier, to transcend the passions, to transcend the ego, to put them at bay, to free oneself from the dictates of these things. And once one is freed from the dictates of the passions and the egos, then one is put in a position to live a fully righteous life. In fact, this is the whole point in some of these ancient religions of trying to overcome the dictates of the passions and the ego. Now, while it is important, of course, for us as Muslims to live a righteous life, Islam as a religion, however, is somewhat unique in that it calls upon Muslims to live not only righteously, but to live righteously and fully. And this is the balance that Islam seeks to effect in the lives of human beings. For Islam, it is not enough, it is not a successful approach to simply try to destroy the passions, to transcend the ego. Rather, what Islam seeks to do is to refine the passions, to refine the ego, to refine the self. As I said, this is for the purpose of enabling human beings, not only, in fact, not simply enabling them, but of encouraging human beings, not simply to live righteously, but rather to live also fully. And this is why, for example, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam even advised certain contemporaries that they should not live lives in which they would fast incessantly all the time, or lives in which they stayed up all night praying and never going to sleep, or lives in which they completely avoided marriage and the opposite sex. Indeed, the Prophet himself said that I fast some days and I eat some days. I pray some nights, and some nights I sleep, or I may pray part of the night and the other part I will sleep. And I marry. In other words, the Prophet was here instructing us again that I conduct my life in such a way in which I engage in practices that will enable me to refine myself, to refine my passions, to refine my ego, such that I am not a person who does not have passions, who does not have an ego, but I am a person who is able to put my passions in their proper place, to allow them to express themselves only in ways that are healthy and wholesome, and that enable me to remain focused on my fundamental debt of gratitude to my Lord.